Richard Blackstone was having the worst day of his life, and that was saying something for a guy who'd built a billion-dollar tech empire from scratch. "Where's my translator?" he shouted into his phone, pacing around the conference room like a caged animal. His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding just as panicked as he felt. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm so sorry. Maria called in sick this morning, and every translation service in the city is booked solid. There's some big international conference happening downtown, and I don't care about excuses." Richard slammed his hand on the mahogany conference table. "The Mendoza Group is walking through that door in 20 minutes to finalize a $500 million deal, and they speak zero English. Zero." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 40th floor office, Richard could see the city buzzing below. Normally, that view made him feel powerful, in control. Today, it just reminded him how far he had to fall. His phone buzzed with a text. Richard's face went white as he read it. "Oh no. Oh no no no." He speed-dialed his assistant again. "Jennifer, they're early. The Mendoza Group just texted. They're in the lobby right now. Sir, I'm still calling every translation service. There's no time." Richard was practically hyperventilating. "This deal. Jennifer, if we lose this deal, we lose everything. The merger, the expansion into Latin America, the investors. Do you understand? Everything depends on the next 2 hours." Richard had worked 5 years to get this meeting. 5 years of calls, emails, flying to Mexico City, learning about the Mendoza family's business empire. They owned half the telecommunications infrastructure in Central America, and partnering with them would make Blackstone Industries the dominant player in the entire region. But there was one tiny problem Richard had somehow overlooked in all his planning. He didn't speak a word of Spanish. The Mendoza family, led by patriarch Eduardo Mendoza and his sharp-as-a-knife daughter Carmen, spoke perfect Spanish and broken English at best. Maria, his usual translator, was the bridge that made everything possible. And Maria was home with the flu. "Think, Richard, think," he muttered to himself, loosening his tie that suddenly felt like a noose. "There has to be someone, somewhere." His phone rang. Jennifer again. "Sir, I found someone. There's a translation service in Brooklyn that might." "How long?" "They say. Maybe an hour and a half if traffic isn't too bad." Richard felt his world crashing down. "The meeting starts in 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, I need to convince the most powerful family in Central American business to trust me with $500 million. And I can't even tell them good morning in their language." That's when he heard it. A voice singing softly in Spanish, coming from somewhere outside the conference room. Richard froze. "Jennifer, I'll call you back." He crept toward the door, listening carefully. The voice was getting closer, and it was beautiful, rich and warm, singing what sounded like an old Mexican folk song. But more importantly, it was singing in perfect Spanish. Richard opened the door and peeked out. Down the hallway, a man in a janitor's uniform was pushing a cleaning cart, completely absorbed in his work and his song. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and weathered hands, wearing the navy blue uniform that Richard usually didn't even notice. "Excuse me," Richard called out, probably too loudly. The janitor looked up, startled. "Yes, sir? Did I disturb you? I can come back later." "Wait!" Richard rushed toward him. "You speak Spanish?" The janitor looked confused. "Sí. I mean, yes, sir. I'm from Guadalajara originally." "Why?" Richard grabbed the man's shoulders. "What's your name?" "Diego. Diego Vasquez." "Sir, is everything okay?" "You look." "Diego!" Richard was practically shouting with relief. "Diego, how would you like to make the most important $20,000 of your life?" Diego's eyes went wide. $20,000? "Sir, I think there's been some mistake. I just cleaned the offices." "No mistake." Richard was already pulling Diego toward the conference room. Diego, in about 10 minutes, the most important business meeting of my entire life is going to happen in this room. I need someone who speaks perfect Spanish, and you just became the most valuable person in this building. Diego was stumbling along behind Richard's cart, completely bewildered. Mr. Blackstone, I don't understand. I just work nights and weekends cleaning. Diego, listen to me very carefully. Richard spun around to face him. I'm about to close a deal worth $500 million with a Mexican business family. If this meeting goes wrong, my company goes bankrupt. If it goes right, I make enough money to buy a small country. And the only thing standing between success and total disaster is whether I can communicate with these people. Diego was shaking his head. Sir, you don't understand. I'm not a businessman. I don't know anything about. I don't need you to know about business. Richard interrupted. I need you to translate. I'll do all the talking. I just need you to make sure they understand what I'm saying, and I understand what they're saying back. The elevator dinged at the end of the hallway. Richard's face went pale. That's them. Diego, please. I'm begging you. Help me out here, and I swear I'll make it worth your while. Diego looked at Richard's desperate face, then at the elevator doors opening to reveal 3 people in expensive suits. Mr. Blackstone, I've never done anything like this before. Neither have I, Richard hissed. We'll figure it out together. The Mendoza family approached with the confidence of people who owned everything they touched. Eduardo Mendoza was in his 60s, silver-haired and dignified, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Diego made in 6 months. His daughter Carmen was maybe 35, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail. The third person was a younger man in his 20s, probably Carmen's brother. Richard plastered on his biggest smile and stepped forward. Mr. Mendoza, welcome to Blackstone Industries. Eduardo smiled politely and said something in rapid Spanish that Richard didn't catch a word of. Richard turned to Diego with panic in his eyes. Diego cleared his throat nervously. He says good morning and thank you for meeting with him. He's excited to discuss the partnership. Great! Richard was sweating bullets. Tell him I'm thrilled they're here, and that this partnership is going to change both our companies forever. Diego translated, his voice getting more confident as he spoke. Eduardo nodded approvingly and responded with another stream of Spanish. He says his research team has been very impressed with your company's expansion plans, Diego relayed. But he wants to discuss some specific concerns about the technical infrastructure. And just like that, they were off and running. For the next hour, Diego found himself in the strangest situation of his life. Here he was, a janitor who usually spent his time emptying trash cans and mopping floors, suddenly sitting at a conference table worth more than his annual salary, translating negotiations that involved more money than he could even imagine. But the weird thing was, he was good at it. Really good. Diego had always been bilingual, but he'd never realized how much business knowledge he'd picked up over the years. 15 years of cleaning offices meant 15 years of overhearing conversations, reading documents that executives left on their desks, absorbing the language of deals and contracts and corporate strategy. When Carmen asked a complex question about network integration protocols, Diego didn't just translate her words. He made sure Richard understood the technical implications. When Eduardo raised concerns about regulatory compliance in different countries, Diego helped Richard clarify the legal frameworks they'd be working within. When the younger Mendoza, Miguel, questioned their timeline for infrastructure deployment, Diego found himself explaining not just what Richard was saying, but why the timeline made sense from an engineering perspective. Wait a minute, Carmen said suddenly, looking directly at Diego. You understand all this technical stuff pretty well for a translator. Diego froze. Richard looked like he was about to have a heart attack. But then Diego surprised himself. Senora, I've been working in tech companies for 15 years. You pick things up, you know? And I've always been good with languages and understanding how systems work together. Carmen smiled. What companies have you worked for? Now Richard was definitely going to have a heart attack. But Diego stayed calm. I've worked for Blackstone Industries for 5 years, and before that I was at TechFlow Solutions and Megabyte Corporation. Always learning, always listening. It wasn't technically a lie. He had worked for all those companies. Just not in the capacity Carmen was probably imagining. Eduardo leaned forward, interested. And what do you think about this partnership from a technical perspective? Diego looked at Richard, who gave him the tiniest nod. Honestly, Diego said, switching to Spanish, I think Mr. Blackstone's vision is brilliant, but he's been missing some key insights about how Latin American telecommunications actually work. You know how it is. Americans sometimes design systems that work great in theory but don't account for real-world conditions. Carmen laughed. Exactly. That's exactly what we've been trying to explain to other American companies. Diego continued, but Mr. Blackstone is different. He spent 5 years studying your markets, your infrastructure, your regulatory environment. He's not trying to copy-paste an American solution. He wants to build something that actually works for your customers. Richard watched in amazement as the Mendoza family relaxed completely. They were nodding, smiling, engaging with Diego like he was an old friend rather than a stranger they'd met an hour ago. Tell me, Eduardo said to Diego, what would you do differently about the implementation timeline? Diego thought for a moment. Well, senor, if I were planning this rollout, I'd start with the smaller markets first. Places like Costa Rica and Panama, where you can test the integration without risking your major infrastructure. Get the bugs worked out, train your teams, then scale up to Mexico and Brazil. Miguel perked up. That's actually a really smart approach. Most companies want to go big immediately. Big failures cost big money, Diego replied. Better to make small mistakes you can fix than huge mistakes that kill the whole project. Carmen turned to Richard. Mr. Blackstone, this gentleman is very impressive. How long has he been your Latin American strategy consultant? Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Diego jumped in smoothly. Mr. Blackstone values input from everyone in his organization. He believes the best ideas come from people who really understand the work, not just the theory. Eduardo nodded approvingly. A wise philosophy. Too many CEOs only listen to people with fancy titles. The meeting continued for another hour, but the tone had completely changed. What started as a formal, cautious negotiation had become a friendly conversation between people who clearly respected each other's expertise. When it came time to discuss numbers, Diego found himself translating figures that made his head spin. $500 million for the initial partnership. Projected revenues of $2 billion over 5 years. Investment commitments that were larger than the GDP of some countries. But he kept his cool, making sure every detail was communicated clearly in both directions. Finally, Eduardo stood up and smiled. Mr. Blackstone, we have a deal. Richard nearly collapsed with relief. Really? Just like that? Carmen laughed as Diego translated. Papa says any CEO smart enough to have advisors like Diego is someone we want to work with. As the Mendoza family prepared to leave, Eduardo shook Diego's hand warmly. Young man, if you ever want to come work for us in Mexico, you have my card. After they left, Richard slumped into his chair like a deflated balloon. Diego, he said quietly, do you have any idea what just happened? Diego was cleaning up the coffee cups, still not quite believing the last 2 hours had been real. We closed your deal, Mr. Blackstone. We just saved my company. We just secured the biggest partnership in Blackstone Industries history. Richard shook his head in amazement. Diego, where did you learn to do that? Diego sat down across from Richard. Mr. Blackstone, you think janitors are invisible. You think we don't hear anything, don't understand anything, don't know anything. But I've been cleaning corporate offices for 15 years. I've heard thousands of meetings, read thousands of documents, learned how business actually works. But the technical knowledge, the strategy insights. I have a degree in electrical engineering from Universidad de Guadalajara, Diego said quietly. But when I came to America 20 years ago, nobody wanted to hire a Mexican engineer. So I took cleaning jobs to feed my family, and I kept taking them because they paid the bills. Richard stared at him. You're an engineer? I was an engineer. Then I was a janitor who used to be an engineer. Today, I guess I don't know what I am. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Jennifer? Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day. And call legal. I need them to draft an employment contract. No, not for me. For our new director of Latin American operations. Diego's eyes went wide. Mr. Blackstone. Diego, that $20,000 I promised you? That was just for today. How does $200,000 a year sound for making sure deals like this keep happening? Diego sat back in his chair, speechless. Plus benefits, plus profit sharing, plus whatever title you want, Richard continued. You just saved my company, and you did it because you knew things that none of my expensive consultants knew. I don't know what to say. Richard smiled. Say yes. Say you'll help me build the kind of company that recognizes talent wherever it comes from. Say you'll teach my other executives what you know about really listening to people and really understanding markets. Diego looked around the conference room where, 2 hours ago, he'd been just another invisible worker. Mr. Blackstone. Yes, absolutely yes. 6 months later, Diego Vasquez stood in front of the board of directors of Blackstone Industries, presenting the quarterly results from their Latin American expansion. Revenue was up 340%. Customer satisfaction was at 94%. The Mendoza partnership had exceeded every projection. The key, Diego explained to the room full of executives, is understanding that good business is about relationships, not just numbers. When you respect people's culture, their language, their way of doing things, they respect you back. After the meeting, Richard found Diego in his new office, the one with windows and a view and a nameplate that read Diego Vasquez, VP of International Operations. Diego, I have to ask you something, Richard said, sitting down across from his friend's desk. That day when you agreed to help me, did you know how it was going to turn out? Diego smiled. Mr. Blackstone, I knew you were desperate enough to ask a janitor for help. That told me you were either crazy or smart enough to recognize good advice wherever it came from. And which was it? Both? Diego laughed. Definitely both. Richard nodded. You know what I learned that day? What? That the most important person in any building might be the person you've never actually noticed before. Diego's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and grinned. What is it? Richard asked. Carmen Mendoza. She wants to set up a call next week about expanding the partnership into South America. Richard raised his eyebrows. Already? She says, and I quote, any company smart enough to promote Diego is a company we want to grow with. As Diego prepared for his next meeting, one where he'd be the lead presenter, not the translator, he thought about how much his life had changed in half a year. He still lived in the same neighborhood, still drove the same car, still spoke Spanish with his kids at dinner. But now he went to work in a suit instead of a uniform. Now people asked for his opinion instead of stepping around him in hallways. Now his daughter could tell her friends that her papa was a business executive, not just a janitor. But the best part wasn't the money or the title or the respect. The best part was proving that intelligence and capability can hide in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone smart enough to recognize it when they see it. And sometimes, when you're desperate enough and lucky enough, the person who saves your entire company might be the same person who's been emptying your trash can for 5 years. You just have to be wise enough to listen when they finally get the chance to speak. If this made you nod or feel something, don't ghost it. Hit like, share it with someone, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Your one click will help this channel greatly. Let's spread light together.